Hi, I'm Dr. J, and welcome to 5 Minute Fridays. I have a background of a master's in human performance/applied sports science and a doctorate in sport and performance psychology. This week, we're going to go over structural changes that are caused by endurance training. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more 5 Minute Fridays with your Dr. J. Before we get deeper into the structural adaptations, let's talk about what is considered to be endurance training, right? And so one way to look at it is potentially an activity that would last over 30 minutes where our oxidative energy system would take over as the primary source of energy and energy production, right? Another way to look at it would be a large muscle mass movement or sustained activity where we're in continuous motion throughout a duration anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour or even longer than that, depending on your sport demands or your individual demands within that context, right? Because we've even got the sports of ultra running where people are running 50 miles to 100 miles within their competitions and their races, right? Where marathon might look like a sprint to some of these ultra runners, right? And then we're also looking at some of the sports where they've got longer duration of play, right? So like soccer, for example, would be one of those. Basketball has a little bit longer of duration. But as we look at our video for this week and the emphasis of this week's, we're looking at the longer duration activities that are more steady state or they're more continuous. So probably along the lines of sports that involve a lot more running, right? So a large number of these structural adaptations that take course within the body and within the muscle are built around the mitochondria. And for those of us that took biology back in high school, what's the mitochondria? The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? This is where the energy gets made, right? This is where the waste products are created to be taken out of the cell. And this is where the nutrients go so that we can utilize them for creating more energy substrate within our muscle, which is known as ATP, right? Adenosine triphosphate. And so within that, there's different ways that we can get that ATP or that energy source within our muscle. So that would be the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, beta oxidation, shuttle systems from pyruvate and lactate, right? And those sources create an opportunity for us to continually have energy readily available so that our muscles can optimally function throughout our activities and our competition, right? And so when we think about these structural changes, some of these changes that get made, we're going to list right here. So when we talk about your heart, we're looking at an increase in stroke volume. We're looking at an increase in your end diastolic volume, your EDV, and an increase in blood flow. And those three parts lead to greater changes down the road, right? So if every time our heart is pumping, we're actually able to move more blood around our body, that allows us to be more oxygen rich in the blood that is getting into our muscle because we're getting so much more within each pump of our heart. So our heart is becoming more efficient. All right. Although we are in shape, it doesn't mean that our heart rate won't rise. It's a matter of how quickly our heart rate is able to come down, which is an indicator of fitness, and also the level of comfort that we have sustaining higher levels of heart rate, right? So as you get more comfortable being in that sustained activity for this endurance training, you might get more comfortable maintaining a higher heart rate, but that doesn't mean that your heart rate max will increase overall. And so that was something that was interesting to me, is that although you're able to reach those higher heart rates, it doesn't mean that your ceiling for what your body's max heart rate might change, but how we're able to move within that can change. So then another set of structural adaptations that occur would be increase in number and size of mitochondria, right? So these powerhouses that are within your cell, not only are they multiplying, but the size of each of these individual powerhouses is actually growing. So the amount of substrate and the amount of enzymatic activity that happens within each of these little mitochondria is actually increasing. So your muscle is becoming more efficient. And in addition to that, your capillary density, right? So the super small ends of your arteries that transition over into your veins, right? So the arteries go into your muscles with oxygen-rich blood from your heart, right? And so your heart pumps out across all of your limbs, into your brain, into your legs and everything. And then your veins return the blood that gets pumped out from your heart, right? But at the muscle site, those capillaries, those super, super small blood vessels are in charge of the exchange of nutrient going into your muscle and removing waste products from those metabolic exchanges that happen within the muscle, right? And so if we've got more mitochondria, that means we've got more enzymes. So that means that our muscles are more efficient to make more energy, right? In addition to that, because there's more capillaries, that means that there's a greater surface area. So when we think about this, right, the capillaries create this network of exchange within the muscle, right? And so if there's more spaces within those capillaries, it means that the blood flow at the muscle site will actually slow down. We're actually able to extract more oxygen. We're able to get more out of the nutrients that are coming into the muscle because our body has time to extract those things, and we're able to remove more waste effectively from the muscle because there's a greater network for this to happen, right? So if the plumbing in our house is not very good, you're going to have a lot of backups, right? When the transport system is better within the muscle, we're able to handle higher levels of lactate and more hydrogen ions, but also the creation of those hydrogen ions and the creation of that lactate is actually lesser. And so with that, our lactate threshold, which is the point where they consider our muscles that want to shut down because of all of the metabolic waste from working occurs, if we're able to handle that better, we're able to go further before that quote unquote burn sets in and it limits our ability to move. Within some of those other increases that are happening within the muscle structure, we also have an increased myoglobin concentration, right? And then we're going to have an improved transport of FFAs or free fatty acids, which will create our power source for the majority of this endurance activity. And because there's a greater blood flow, that means that there's more opportunity for your body to break down the stored fat to be able to be used as energy versus some of our more intensive and higher speed ATP creating opportunities. There's no need for oxygen. And so if there's no oxygen needed, we tend to make pyruvate, which leads into lactate and free hydrogen ions, leading to greater lactate concentrations within the muscle. Whereas our oxidative forms of energy creation actually use oxygen. And so then that hydrogen ion that is left at the end of most of our other energy systems, and that increased amount of lactate is actually reduced because we're getting more energy with less waste products. And that has to do with the amount of blood flow and the amount of oxygen that's available at that point, in addition to us being able to have a greater number of mitochondria and a greater size of mitochondria. So we've just got more ability to be able to handle those stressors of training, right? And if we're able to handle those stressors of training much better, don't you think our performance would improve? And that could be mentally, physically, both mentally and physically, and even just energetically or spiritually speaking, as far as being able to be tuned into that performance. And it's much easier to do better when we feel better, right? And so that leads us into the next part. All right, how do we train, and when can we expect these training adaptations to occur for us to feel better in how we're moving? So if we look at these structural adaptations occurring over a timeline, right? How long will it take us to double our mitochondria and also have an increase in size, right? So it takes approximately 4 to 6 weeks of consistent endurance training, at minimum 3 to 5 days of training per week, right? And with this 3 to 5 days of training per week, you need to be doing a minimum of 20 to 60 minutes of endurance intensive exercise, right? And this could be steady state. This could be longer duration interval work where you're continuously moving in between, or fartleks, which is kind of like a speed play where you're continuously in motion and you're changing speed, but you're not quite getting all the way to a sprint, but you're being very intentful in how you're moving, and it requires large muscle mass for you to move, right? And it's hard for us to get adaptations in muscles that we are not recruiting. All right, I'm gonna say that one more time. It is hard, damn near impossible, for you to get adaptations in muscles that you are not training. So if we're not using our full body for this movement, don't expect to have those endurance changes to happen within your full body, right? If we're doing the hand bike, for example, right? I'd imagine that your adaptations would occur in the shoulder. In general, you would be more fit, but for our greatest structural changes, that would happen at the local site. That would happen at your arms, where you're working and you're using the hand bike, right? If you're focusing on training your legs, whether you're running, you're riding your bike, or you're swimming, those adaptations are going to happen at the muscle site that you're using, right? So you're going to get those adaptations in your legs, right? So most of our runners, most of our endurance-based athletes and endurance-based sports, a lot of their adaptations are going to happen within their legs, right? And also their arms, depending on the involvement. So our games that involve throwing, right, or involve a ball, they're also going to have those adaptations at their shoulder, but probably not to the same degree that would happen within the muscles in your legs, because also the muscles in our legs have greater surface area and greater fibers than our muscles in our upper body do, right? Comparatively, we are very dense muscularly in our limbs, our lower limbs, and we're not as muscularly dense in our upper limbs, except for, some of y'all are working very hard, and I applaud your effort, and you guys are doing it, right? But as far as we're speaking endurance-wise, your best gains will happen in those legs when you're working your legs to build for those sports that require you to use your legs in this endurance capacity, right? So if this 4 to 6 weeks of training, right, it only takes 1 week for you to become detrained. And after this 1 week, you'll experience significant loss in your mitochondrial density, and those mitochondria might diminish just a little bit. And say you take an entire week off and you do absolutely nothing, right? This is what we consider detraining. Absolutely nothing, or nothing even close to the capacity of the work that you've been doing, right? It'll only take you 3 to 4 weeks to get back to where you were. So now this is where it gets interesting, right? So it took you 4 to 6 weeks to get this massive gain, to have this double in mitochondrial size and density. It took you 1 week to have a significant loss, all right? And when we talk about studies, most of the time a significant loss is anything that's greater than 5%. So this is not saying you've lost all of your training, but you've lost it in a significant degree that if we were to retest you on a certain standard, you might not perform as well after doing a week of nothing. But then you get back and you start training again. In 3 to 4 weeks, you will be back at those adaptations that you had from the 4 to 6 weeks, right? So it takes a little bit less time to get back to that point that you were at. And then in another study by Coyle et al., they actually found out that after 84 days, although you are completely detrained, so 84 days, after 12 weeks of detraining, not doing anything, the individuals that they had trained for these 4 to 6 weeks had significant loss in their endurance capacity, but they were still well above their baseline value. So the awesome part of this is when you do this endurance training, your capillary density does not reduce, and the oxidative enzyme activity does not reduce either. So that means that even if you have detrained, the ability for your body to retrain and to regain those adaptations is going to be much easier than it was the first time. So instead of you always starting back at 0 or starting below baseline, each time you train yourself and each time you reach that point and you're setting yourself up for improved benefits through this consistent training, your baseline keeps rising. As you continue to practice, as you continue to grow in these things and you put them into work, continue to improve, and you'll continue to see these benefits in all the activities that you do. So even if you're not purely an endurance athlete, there will be benefit for you doing endurance training so that your body can handle the stressors that you need to do for your repeat sprint activities or your repeat high intensity activities, right? And having that higher ability for oxidative enzyme activity or the oxidative energy creation systems will make your body more efficient, right? And another note is that our body doesn't exist on one energy system at a time. It uses multiple energy systems. It's just a matter of which one is our priority, right? And so when we're looking at that endurance training, the oxidative systems just happen to be priority during that time. If you have more specific questions about training and how to improve your endurance for different types of activities and how does this relate to maybe sprint or high intensity sports, don't be afraid to reach out. I would love to help you and help you create a solution that will be functional for your training goals. Once again, I'm Dr. J, and thank you for joining us for this 5 Minute Friday. And as always, be refined by the grind.